Guys, here we are, season 2, episode 1 of the Sermon Above the Clouds. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to dive into the Sermon on the Mount. And so that's what we're going to be doing today for this first episode. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, verse 2 and 3. But before I read those, I really just want to kind of lay some groundwork and give us a bit of a foundation for the next, several episodes. Because the next several episodes, we are going to be going through the Beatitudes. Beatitude is such an interesting word. It comes from the Latin beatus, which literally translates as happy or fortunate. And I don't know what translation of the Bible you use. I'm using the ESV. And so I'm going to see blessed repeated over and over again for the next several verses. But you, depending on your translation, you might see happy or you might see fortunate. No matter what, with these words, blessed and happy and fortunate, straight away we get this sense that this kingdom is different. This teaching is different. This is upside down kind of thinking and teaching. It is a subversion of so much from Jesus. And in some ways you can read it and you're like, is this like absurd? Is this crazy to actually say fortunate, congratulations, blessed are you when you mourn, blessed are you when you are persecuted? But the more you actually wrestle with, meditate on, see the context of, and understand the Beatitudes, the more you recognize the blessing of it or the congratulations that's in it. You know, there's a lot of different translations for this word makarios, this Greek word makarios. My favorite comes from Darrell Johnson, who also wrestles with all the different translations. And I think I want to say that it's my favorite because when he said this, it's almost like the Beatitudes, they just clicked for me. And so he took blessed and he dug into it and he came up with his favorite being in sync. Okay, so just as a sample, in sync are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. In sync are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. In other words, we are best representing the kingdom of God. We look most like Jesus and his kingdom when we are poor in spirit, when we are mourning, when we are meek, when we hunger and thirst for righteousness, which those things alone, they look nothing like the world's kingdom, but this is how we look as part of God's kingdom that includes all people. It includes people into the highways and the byways, people who are rich, people who are poor. It is a beautiful kingdom that we can actually belong to. I'll be honest, I think when I first read the Beatitudes, what I did was I took this almost as obedience and reward. If I behave a certain way, then I will get a reward. So if I mourn, then I'm going to get comfort. If I am meek, then I'm going to get my inheritance. I'm going to inherit the earth. And so we can be tempted to treat it that way of just like, if I can just be pure enough, then I'll see God. And if I'm not pure, then I'm not going to see God. But the Beatitudes are more a set of values that are going to naturally be represented in the people of God the more they follow Jesus. So I'll put it this way. We become a Beatitude people when we follow Jesus. And the Beatitudes, by the way, they are not like personality types, right? So it's not some like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram thing where it's just like, hey, you're a peacemaker, whereas I am like poor in spirit or I am pure in heart. It's all describing, one and the same person. And it's crazy when you read it, you go, actually, this so describes Jesus. This describes who Jesus was and how Jesus operated. And therefore, the more, like I said, the more we follow him, the more we are naturally going to become a beatitude people. And these are the kingdom people. We are the kingdom people that God is sending out into the world. Okay, so let's dive in for this episode. Verse 2, it says, Jesus opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Man, blessed in sync are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I'll never forget years ago, I was listening to a Reinhard Bonnke sermon in Sydney, Australia. And he talked about how every religion in the world will teach you this. Every religion will teach you that life is about setting a table for God. So you try to be a good person, you offer your sacrifices, you go to church, you do all of this stuff, and it's all about you, your performance, what you can do. You set a table for God, and hopefully He will accept you. It's almost like this rewards-based thing. If I live a good enough life, if I do enough righteous deeds, then I will be invited to the table of God. Christianity, Reinhard Bonnke taught us, is different to every other religion because Christianity teaches that Jesus has already set the table for us. It's not about us setting a table for Him. He has already set a table for us. In other words, we will never be good enough. It's not about our performance. It's not about our church attendance. It's not about cussing less. It's not about charitable works. There's actually nothing that we can do to earn our seat at the table. It is the grace of God and it is the mercy of God that allows us to be at the table. It is the sacrifice, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ that allows us to sit at the table. So what am I getting at? What I'm getting at is I get this picture of like a beggar, right? A beggar who has nothing to offer, a beggar who can't buy his way into the palace. He can't buy his way to sit at the king's table and become royalty. He can't earn his identity. And yet it's just this gift given to him. It's like picture a beggar getting the keys to the kingdom of God. This is the picture that we get here. What Jesus is saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, is he's saying that this is an inclusive kind of gospel. It's not just good news for the really strong. It's not just good news for the self-sufficient, for the self-starters. It's not just good news for the ones who are excellent, the ones that are leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the experts of the law, but this is for anyone who is actually poor in spirit. What does that mean? What does it mean to be poor in spirit? It means to be completely spiritually bankrupt. In short, if I can sum it up, it means to be dependent. In sync are those who are dependent on God, for theirs is the kingdom of God. In sync are those who realize, man, there is actually nothing that I can offer, nothing that I can bring, no amount of striving and effort that I can do that earns me a seat at the table. What gets me there is an acknowledgement of my dependence, an acknowledgement of my need. And man, I love this so much because it's so the opposite of the kingdom of the earth. The kingdom of the earth would say that in sync with the kingdom are the people who are pushers, the people who are strong, the people that are self-sufficient, that can take care of themselves, that can hold themselves up, who are rich in spirit. But Jesus is actually saying, hey, the prerequisite is really to just recognize your need for me. Do you realize that you can't earn your salvation? Do you realize? Because you got to understand that in context, Jesus is speaking to a bunch of nobodies. He's not speaking to the leaders of the world, the elite. He's speaking to prostitutes and tax collectors and fishermen and people that are just nobodies in the eyes of the world. And he's saying, hey, you right there, poor in spirit, dependent, can't do this on your own, can't be saved in your own merit. Welcome to the kingdom of God. I think about what it says in Luke chapter 12, where it says the Father delights, it's his great pleasure to give his kingdom to his little flock. Think about sheep. Sheep are pretty helpless without a shepherd. And it's the same with us. And so there is a blessing, there is fortune. We are in sync when we recognize our need for God. I want to ask you that question today. Do you recognize your need for God? Do you realize that you are spiritually bankrupt and you cannot do this on your own? You can't do this life on your own? It makes me think about Revelation chapter 3, verse 17. Jesus is speaking to, I believe it's the church in Laodicea. And he says, "For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are actually wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked." And so what he's saying is, this is the tragedy. You think you don't need anything. You think you have earned the right to a seat at the table. He's going after pride. He's going after self-sufficiency. And he's saying, you know what? The kingdom actually belongs to people who realize that they can't do it on their own merit. And so this is good news today, guys. If you feel dependent, if you feel weak, then that is actually right where you're meant to be. You don't have to earn, you don't have to prove, you don't have to strive. And we realize that dependence is actually a blessing and not a curse. It is actually a strength and not a weakness, because dependence allows us to reach out to God and we realize, oh my gosh, He has given us the kingdom. I think sometimes people are really challenged by this beatitude, and you can be tempted to read it wrong. You can read it as like in Luke's account, blessed are the poor, and just go, okay, so Jesus is laying out this commandment where basically I'm meant to be poor. And so am I meant to just sell everything that I have? Am I meant to have nothing to my name? Is God calling every single one of us as followers of Jesus, if we want to be a part of the kingdom? Do we have to be physically poor, like literally have nothing in our bank accounts? That's not what Jesus is saying at all. He's speaking about bankruptcy of spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit. But I will say this, something that the poor, and the poor are certainly included. That's the beauty of the gospel, right? Jesus is speaking to a lot of people who are poor, and he's saying, you're included, you're welcome into this kingdom. But something that the poor do have going for them is dependence. They have nothing but dependence. And this is what I would say. When you realize that Jesus is all that you have, you realize that Jesus is actually all that you need. I'm going to say that again. When you realize that Jesus is all that you have, you realize that Jesus is all that you need. And I have found myself in various seasons of life, including this one right now as I'm recording this podcast. There is a blessing in being in a place of dependence, like physically being in a place of dependence, because you realize at a deeper level that He is our sufficiency, that Jesus, the King of this kingdom that we belong to, is our sufficiency. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. What a privilege that as we are a part of this kingdom that we did not earn, but Jesus paid for us to be there by His blood, by His resurrection. Because of that, we get this treasure that is unparalleled. There's no greater treasure. He is the prize. Being a part of this kingdom is the prize. And by the way, you're going to notice in the Beatitudes that there's a lot of now and not yet. There's a lot of present tense and a lot of future tense. But I love that it says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom belongs to you and I right now. What does Jesus say? The good news. When Jesus comes proclaiming the good news of the gospel, what does He say? The first line out of His mouth is this: the kingdom of God is at hand. What a beautiful thing it is to realize that we are dependent on Him. The world might call it weakness. The world might call it folly. The world might say, no, you need to take care of yourself and you need to be strong and you need to put on a front and you need to perform. But there is blessing that we are in sync when we realize, oh man, I can't do this without you, Jesus. I need you. So once again, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. How awesome is that?